philosophy, we have this tradition of idiots. In almost respectfully, isn't Carnap's well-known critique of Heidegger an example of highly intelligent idiocy? You know, when it's logically contradictory to talk about nothing and so on. Logically, he can be very clever, but he's an idiot. And idiots can play a great role here. From what I read about him, Alan Turing. And if there was a guy who was intelligent, it was him. He cracked the code, to exaggerate a little bit, saves us from Nazism. But if there ever was an idiot, it is him. The model of this idiocy is, of course, that Andersen child who says the emperor is naked. No, idiot. He doesn't get it. But we shouldn't nonetheless celebrate too much this idiot, because I think the child wasn't right. The emperor was naked. What he didn't get is, as Lacan quotes a wonderful story of that French wonderful satire writer Alphonse Allais, who once, there's an anecdote, you probably know the story, pointed at a woman and said, "Look at that shameless woman, what a shame. Beneath her dress she is totally naked." This is what Andersen's, this is what this type of naively logical idiot doesn't see. Then the opposite idiocy, which is absolutely, I agree with you, Wolfgang, here, exceptionally, I sometimes agree here, is that an idiot which is absolutely crucial. Without it we cannot function. Best, to those who love detective stories, best presented by that idiot partner of a detective, you know, Watson to Sherlock Holmes, Hastings to Poirot. As Poirot says somewhere very nicely, "I need you, Hastings, not just so that, in contrast to your common sense stupidity, my brilliance, but because in order to interpret the crime, I have to see how, when the criminal tries to erase the traces of the crime, he counted on how to do it to dupe the common sense, the idiot. It's only through the mediation of idiot's perception that the detective can do his job. This is why great detectives are aware. You need an idiot. Again, it's not just for boasting. And would you agree, my final aggressive thought, that the super case of this idiocy is the chorus in Greek tragedy? They're idiots par excellence. They are these common sense who tell these common wisdoms. You know what is for me idiocy? Proverbs. Because they are totally meaningless, conformistic. Whatever you say, you can justify it through a proverb. Like, you try to do something. You fail, I will tell you. I will make a deep comment. No, I will say one of these idiotic wisdoms. Haha, look, Avital, you cannot piss against the wind or what. No, you succeed.
You are mistaken.
I will file you tomorrow in front of.
Here we go, YouTube.
The last one. But also, and okay, you do something risking you succeed. I am a wise guy, I will come and say, yes, you must have some proverb. In Slovene we have one, he says, only those who risk do profit, and so on. You know, this is the utmost idiocy of proverbs. But again, we shouldn't despise it. It's necessary. We need both this type. So I would just, if you agree, respectfully, with your basic category of idiocy, would you agree that these two also maybe should be added as subcategories?
Yes,
surprisingly.
No, absolutely. And also, one might consider also the invention and the persecutory uses of certain downgrades. For example, I don't know if you know this, you might in your encyclopedic computer knowledge, absolute knowledge, that where the word moron comes from.
No.
You don't know?
I am one, but
That's the first time I caught you not knowing, pretending, staging a non-knowledge. But this was invented by American psychologists to designate immigrants who came off the boat. The welcoming committee in America, in the United States, on Ellis Island, consisted of having these immigrants sit down and take tests, You know, they're exhausted, they're hungry, and so on, and they all take tests, and the psychologists came up with the word moron, which was lower than average intelligence, and so they started off by being left back. But what I wanted to say, it's not only psychologists and so on, but there are whole institutions that depend on and buff up in very serious ways idiocy as also an act of naming, of debasing and demeaning and so on and so forth. So this would open all sorts of dossiers. I completely agree with you about your point about the hyper-intelligent and so on. There are other figures, such as the absent-minded professor. There are figures of sacred idiocy that we haven't had a chance to mention, such as, for example, Joan of Arc, who was illiterate, but that meant she was emptied out for a higher calling. So there are also figures, and this is what Dostoevsky really pushes in a way, these figures that are emptied out of any kinds of grounding or securing knowledge and so on and so forth. But that means that they're open, radically exposed to the possibility of a higher and a different kind of calling and summoning, different destiny, or even maybe destiny as such, if one can even talk that way anymore. But one of the early, let's say, encounters that I made with the enigma of idiocy was Goethe's choice. I like the way you have these couples, absolutely, you know, Don Quixote and his sidekick, all of these heroic figures that somehow were propped up and in love with Batman and Robin. I don't know, you can go on. These couples that required the idiot other. Why is that a requirement of some sort of heroic pose or accomplishment? What instigated some of this thought was Goethe had the choice of all sorts of outstanding candidates to be his running mate, his copyist, and his assistant, amanuensis. And he chose Eckermann, who was illiterate, who was in many ways depraved and deprived and so on. So I always tried to read Goethe's desire in choosing this idiot who was so fabulous that he learned to mime and imitate Goethe perfectly, including the handwriting, and finished Goethe's autobiography and signed for him and took over for him in certain ways. So there's something about the desire on the part of the great writer, also Rilke and others, well, we can argue about Rilke, that requires some sort of up close and tight relation to idiocy. And this is, you're absolutely right to make us think of poetry's muscle to also exploit and violently appropriate for itself and turn out something and posit something. I hadn't thought of that at all, because I guess I hadn't assigned to poetry the kind of destinal velocities that Heidegger gets away with, you know. I thought poetry, you know. But you're right to ask that, raise that question. So those would be a few points in partial response to the richness of your intervention.